Good morning, everybody. I was nearly said afternoon. We're about 5 minutes from the afternoon. Good afternoon. Good morning. Colin White here from Credit Connect Media. Hope everybody is well. Just wanted here to introduce you the third session, our online collections technology think tank today. If you haven't seen the recent sessions earlier, we had a session on looking at collections risk and customer engagement. And now we're moving on to our third session in a day, which will look at propensity to pay. So in this session, I obviously I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation, but I also would like to see hopefully some of you guys out there who are viewing this getting involved as well. So I'll quickly talk through the event platform very briefly. Obviously in front of you, you've got the videos, you can watch us, listen to the conversation. Secondly, we are covering the you've got the opportunity to view information on the speakers, download information about our event supporters as well, and also interact as well. So you can, on the speech bubble, we'd love for you to ask questions on there. That would be brilliant. The other part of that as well is if you want to, on social media, using LinkedIn and Twitter, if you can avoid the tsunami of information about Boris Johnson today, you can also contribute on LinkedIn and Twitter with the hashtag collectionstechtt as well. This session is kindly sponsored by CallMiner. So if you want to find out more information about CallMiner, then obviously have a look at the information on the tabs on the left-hand side. But enough from me. I'm going to hand over to our event chair for the day, who's helped in our last sessions, Chris Warburton from RO Strategy. And he will introduce our speakers and get the conversation started. So, Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Colin. Good to see everyone today. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, a little bit about, I suppose, the session here. We've got three great panelists here. We've got Nina White, who's the Director of Financial Customer Care at Thames Water. We've got Peter Munro, who's the Partnership Director of PayPlan. And we've got Rick Britt, who's the VP of AI at CallMiner. So you three guys are very much welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. This session here, we're going to talk a little bit about propensity to pay and collection strategy. And I suppose, you know, I sort of added on collection strategy in terms of like linking that to propensity to pay, in terms of like there's been a lot of pressures seemingly on customers and household finances recently. You know, we've got the pandemic, we've got rising inflation, increasing price of energy, interest rates, generally the cost of living. And we talked about some of those in the earlier sessions. But this one here is like, we want to just explore a little bit around how's this impacting customers' ability to pay, their propensity to pay, and what do we need to do in terms of reacting to that from our collection strategy point of view. So that was the topic of the conversation here. I think just before we start, it's probably just worth just quickly going around the panelists, just to sort of explain a little bit about, you know, what your role is, where you're from, and what you kind of do within your company. So Nina, do you want to go first, real quick?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chris. Hello, my name's Nina White. I lead financial customer care at Thames Water, and what that is day to day, it has three core elements. It runs the credit risk strategy for Thames. We look after our vulnerable customers and champion inclusion of customers at Thames. And then when we run the call centres, looking after the collections and recoveries, and also those customers in financial difficulty and hardship. I'm relatively new to the water industry, having just joined Thames 18 months ago. And my background was very similar, but in banking and financial services before that. So very pleased to be here today.
Yeah, lovely. Peter?
Yeah, hi guys, great to be here. So Peter Munro, Partnerships Director, PayPlan. So PayPlan have been established around 25 years now and work with all sorts of partners within all sorts of sectors to help customers in financial difficulty. So I've been here sort of 10 years, seen lots of different things happening, COVID, cost of living crisis. And I think we tend to be ahead of the curve in terms of we see things earlier with people tipping over. So it'd be great to share insights today and what we think is going to come down the path and how we can all help.
Fabulous. And lastly, Rick, what is a very early morning for you? But
yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, so I do artificial intelligence. I'm one of those people that has a decent definition of what that word means, which means my family has no idea what I actually do for a living. In the AI world, I work at CallMiner, and we are a company that takes interactions, and we have a lot of collections clients. We take the interactions between perhaps a collector and a customer, and we turn that into data. And then we can interrogate that data, all of it, and see what's happening in those worlds. And so when we talk about propensity to pay or willingness to pay, or even finding vulnerabilities or the difficulties going on in people's lives, our software is uniquely poised to do that. My background, I came before CallMiner, I was a customer, and I was a customer at a company called Encore Capital Group, who owns a company called Midland Credit Management, and in the UK, Cabot. And so I come from a pretty solid collections background. I was doing analytics strategy and operational strategy for collections before this one.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so we'll kick off the discussion. I mean, we just talked about it in the intro. I mean, there's lots of new demands on customers at the moment. I mean, we talked about some of them in terms of like generally it's coming through in terms of like cost of living. I mean, what do you think the best way is to think about, I suppose, collection strategy and propensity to pay in the current environment? And maybe Peter, I'll come with you to that first question.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I guess to just give people some context in terms of the pay plan, what we see. So effectively, our job in the industry is that somebody at their bank, their credit card provider, their debt purchaser, water company, could be engaging with their creditor, if you like, express that they're in financial difficulties, in a deficit budget, struggling with lots of multiple debts, and they would refer to the likes of ourselves or Step Change or Citizens Advice Bureau to have that holistic conversation. So because it's incumbent on us to have that holistic conversation, we will have a very robust conversation with the customer, typically 60 to 75 minutes, to understand everything about their income and expenditure, their personal circumstances, etc. So we do get some good insights in terms of what's happening, both in terms of a temperature check at the front end being new customers coming to us for help today. And then also we do deliver debt solutions as well. So we have a debt management portfolio of about 61,000 customers. So we've kind of got two lenses on this cost of living crisis in terms of what are we seeing at the front end today, which can help us prepare for tomorrow, but also how can we support the financial resilience of the back book, if you like, that we've got. So there's some worrying signals, I think, at the minute in terms of what's coming down the path. I'm conscious when I work with some of the banks and the credit card providers, etc., they're kind of hanging on, thinking, well, October looks like it's going to be the cliff edge, which then might float in January. But in terms of right now, some key warnings that we're seeing is that we are busier than we have ever been. So we're currently seeing record demand for our free debt advice service, and it's 32% higher versus last year as well. So we've got, to context that feed, we've got about 3,000 new customers coming to us every single week going, help, I'm really stuck with this debt problem. So that is a real issue for us in terms of capacity, not just ourselves, but it will be for the sector. If you think that if it's that high now, record demand, how are we going to respond as an industry when things do get really, when those energy prices go up again in October and things like that, what's going to happen? So it's not just uptick in demand, there's actually changing demographic amongst that demand as well. So typically pay plan would see in the past would be customers that may have been robbing Peter to pay Paul a bit, might have had some excessive lifestyle issues, might have just had a life event, etc. But we're now seeing, definitely through this cost of living crisis, people being more squeezed. So we've done some analysis looking at what people looked like when they came to us in Q1 2019, which was kind of the last pre-COVID period, and what they look like this year. And it's quite startling, really, some of the differences. So people, vulnerabilities are up significantly. So 52% of people coming to us right now have one or more vulnerabilities. That was previously in 2019, that was 32%. So that's gone up significantly. Priority arrears are on the rise as well. So 25% of people come to us at the minute have a priority arrears issue. That was only 5% back in Q1 2019. So you can see in that data the flow through of the energy and the council tax rises, etc. We've seen, as a result, one of our key metrics is cost to income ratio that we measure. So back in 2019, it was about 90% cost to income ratio. Now it's about 94%. So again, people are seeing that squeeze. And as a result of that, naturally, as you would expect, we are seeing increasing deficit situations. So in our world, deficits, the expenditure outweighs the income. You're in a deficit situation. So all of these things are pointing in the wrong direction, really. And we've also seen, which is interesting, demographic-wise, an increase in self-employed customers struggling. So 17% of those that come to us are now self-employed. Previously, that was sub 10%. So the self-employed seem to be disproportionately hit. So front end, we're very nervous about can we deal with the capacity? How can we help our partners deal with that capacity? Because that, 70% of the customers that come to us via a partner. If Nina, for example, or people in the collection centres get busier, we're going to get busier. So how can we help? How can we use technology more effectively to help us do that scaling? And then I guess, so there's those early warning signs, and we've been in dialogue with all our partners supplying data. Then a more salient issue in terms of our back book is just what level of resilience do we have across those 61,000 customers. Now, because of the nature of what we do, it's already pretty tight. So the average 75% of our back book make a payment to us of £200 or less a month. So there's not much room for that squeeze. And quite worryingly, what we're seeing at the minute is an increase in what we call change in circumstances reviews. So that is where a customer, an event or something has happened that's triggered them to proactively ring us. We're duty bound by the FCA to engage with the customer at least every 12 months to perform an annual review. But these are people who said, you know what, I'm going to ring PayPlan because this has changed. So we've seen a 20% increase in that, which is more activity for us to absorb. But more frighteningly is that the result of those conversations is that they've reduced their payments by £43, which is a significant reduction. So if you extrapolate that across your book, that's going to be worrying. Another worrying sign is that even amongst the normal kind of business as usual annual reviews, people are coming out of those with a reduction of £12 in their payment as well. Might not seem much a month, we're in this conversation, but you add that over the year and you look at the demographic they're dealing with, a lot of these people are in danger of falling over. So we've got, sorry to be all doom and gloom, but yes, we're definitely seeing rise in volumes. We're nervous about customer resilience. We're nervous about how can we help these new customers with their complexities and the scale. And we're going to touch later in the session about forbearance options. What can we do with them? And how can we keep people paying on the back book?
So we just had a conversation in the last session around, if you look at outside of the, I suppose, the debt advice sector, I mean, you look at the wider books, and I mean, people are starting to see it sort of like the volume starting to trickle through, and it sounds like it's on the margin around affordability, or having net disposable income, and it's that margin which is sort of pushing out. So like you're just getting more people getting caught in the kind of trap. But actually, people are quite resilient. And at what point, is there going to be a cliff edge? We see like another spike in volume or not? I mean, that was some of the discussion we had on the last one. I mean, Nina, I'll go to you as sort of like as someone who with a large customer base. I mean, are you seeing some of the themes that Peter talked about, or is it maybe a little bit diluted because you've got the prime customers as well, almost in the mix too?
Yeah, I certainly recognise a lot of what Peter has described. I think our Thames Water region includes London and the Thames Valley, and London has the high, from a deprivation index, is top of the pops really. And what we're starting to see is overall at a portfolio level, our performance when you talk around collections is remaining pretty stable. Now, some of that will almost be because we are continuing to drive our improvements within our strategy and our people's competency, and it's somewhat masking some of the cohorts of our population that are really starting to struggle. And we have a social tariff for up to 313,000 customers, where we only pass on 50% of the bill, and it's funded by our customer base overall. Now we're seeing applications into that social tariff remaining pretty steady, but the key threshold of being able to apply for that social tariff is that you're on benefits. So we're not really seeing at this moment in time any greater gains, and I think that's probably evident by what the employment situation is. We're not necessarily seeing any higher unemployment. The problem is the employed, their wages aren't going as far, and so what we are certainly starting to see is that section of the population who are just about managing, and they're starting to tip into not managing. They're starting not to be able to make those sort of easier trade-offs, and that they're starting to have to make difficult trade-offs. We also observe when we listen to our customers for a percentage of customers, actually during COVID, they actually were able to save more. Certainly for the first lockdown, the opportunities to spend money were not particularly great. And so we are seeing that there's still a base of our customers that are using that savings pot that they had to manage, and that will certainly dwindle very quickly. So, I mean, when you listen to calls, whether it be within collections, whether it be within our extra care team that deal with those customers who identify as vulnerable, or our general customer services, I would say 7 out of 10 calls, the customer is indicating some level of financial affordability. Now, whether or not when you get into the income and expenditure, there is a deficit, and we're certainly seeing an increase in those that have a deficit, or it's just that the many customers just haven't felt this squeeze so much and are far more nervous about their financial situation. Actually, when you go through an income and expenditure, that there is a level of surplus income that they can manage, but not many people do that unless they start to feel the squeeze. And so we're definitely seeing how customers are feeling about their financial situation worsen. And for those customers who are just about managing, they're starting to tip into not managing, and they're not going to be very resilient for future price rises.
So it kind of feels like there's a bit of a bubble sitting out there, and it's sort of like we're almost like seeing a bit like the tip of the iceberg, to use two analogies together. But it's like, what else is sort of like coming up, and how do we get ahead of that? And I was going to go to Rick just to ask around, what kind of, there's, you talked about AI, but mathematical techniques or data to get ahead of that, to look at propensity to pay or propensity to not pay, really, I suppose, or to have this financial difficulty. And what can we use? I mean, we talked a bit about calls there, but there might be other kind of areas as well to look at. What's your kind of view as an expert in AI, at least, anyway?
Yeah, within this, Peter and Nina, thank you. They're both fantastic, and they lead to the same spot. And I think Nina mentioned this a lot. Within the AI world and then within collections itself, everything's about population. So if we think about in the collection space, there's a percentage of people that will never in their lives enter into collection for whatever financial reasons. They have a nice amount of income, enough to cover those obligations, or able to make a series of choices so that all the obligations they have are covered. But as we see what's happening right now in the world, especially this sort of exceptionally unique post-pandemic plus inflationary cycle that we're finding ourselves in, there's always been sort of a static group of people who do find themselves in collections for whatever choices or whatever things that happen, and that's the population we're used to talking to. The one that Peter mentioned was relatively stable, right? But now he's seeing an increase in the size of that population, mainly because what we think is happening is we're shifting up. So now there's a group of people that may have never entered into collections in their lives, but we're beginning to find them in that space because of the financial changes out of their control that they're running into in this world now. And that's probably Peter's $3,000 a month is probably becoming slightly more upscale than he had expected, and they're beginning to tip. Now, when that happens, the bottom of this, where the people tip over, it grows. The bottom will be most affected, and so you're going to see a greater number of people tipping or falling off of the bottom of that population. I apologize, this is so mathematical. We're talking about human beings here, right? There are human lives attached to all these numbers, all this strategy. When we take a look at that group from an AI perspective, we then can segment it. So we segment it vertically. You can begin to say, what are the reasons why people are either entering in or staying in or having trouble cycling out of this population? And you begin to break them down. Really, it's broken down into 3 big areas. Are they willing to pay? Are they able to pay? Or are they willing and able to pay? And when you take a look at those, that's your propensity. If someone is willing, I want to pay you, and they're able to pay, and I have the money, they'll begin to resolve. That's what Peter was talking about, is populations or group that do that. There's a larger group that seem like they're becoming unable. Not unwilling, unable, and that's where this 43 pounds is this big reduction. Of course, when Peter's talking average 43 pounds, some people that's 4, and some people that's 400 pounds, and that's going to come to that average of 43, right? It's going to become very difficult. So as we take a look at how artificial intelligence attacks those populations, it's beginning to understand what are the right strategies for each of those areas, but we can cut it the other way too. What are the human beings on the other side as well? And I see you're about to jump in, so I'll pause.
I was going to say, but how much is the fact, we'll talk about this a little bit on the last one, the fact that history's changed and the dynamics has changed is affecting our ability to be able to look at that or predicting propensity to pay. And the fact that, that things have changed so much recently. I mean, and how reactive can it be to sort of look at those new segments, or look at, for Peter's example, looking at people who haven't been in collections before are now struggling. You don't actually have the data to then be able to then model that. I mean, how do we need to think about that in terms of being fast and being able to react and be able to build the models quickly?
We do actually have the data. There's always people entering into this world, and there's always people leaving this world. Right now, you're seeing a larger group go in, but we've always had people at a various credit stratas, for whatever reasons, enter into it. Perhaps there wasn't as large of a population as we see now, but the models still hold true. The willingness and ability models still hold true. People are human beings, right? We react generally the same way to things, and we can actually begin to build profiles of how people react, and that helps to build the strategies. That's when, when you say profile, that to me is a model output, but I kind of put it in a human language, right? But I can take this person and put them into a particular area, and then you can say, I can operate against that area. And what we're seeing is those areas are growing in size in some of those areas now, and there's a lot more, at least in the work we're doing, there's a lot more resistance to some of the strategies that have worked in the past. And that's a good thing, because there isn't resistances for a particular reason. I'm not sure. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So, the answer is we have the data. We just haven't had as much. The more data you have, the better the machines do.
Yeah.
So when a population begins to grow, we can become more accurate on predicting if they're going to enter and how long they're going to stay. If that helps answer your question.
Yeah. And I suppose, Peter and Nina, I suppose from, when you see that sort of, on the floor or in conversations with customers, I mean, do you see this sort of like, is the propensity to change changing for different demographics? I mean, are you seeing that on the margin, and even things like channels, like the channel in which does that change things like propensity to pay? So if it was messaging versus making it easy on messaging versus maybe over the telephone, those kind of things. I mean, do those things make a difference? You seeing changes, more fundamental changes?
Do you want me to go in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, spot on what Rick just said there in terms of we have seen that shift. The biggest shift in demographic, apart from the self-employed one, is actually we're seeing more high-income customers coming to us who absolutely haven't experienced this arrears situation before. They simply don't know how to budget. So we've seen that uptick. We levered off at sort of 60k plus household would be in that high net household income category, and that has been our biggest increase this year in terms of new people coming to us and not being in arrears before. So we've had that. We've seen that, but also we've seen through our working with our partners, particularly some of the high street banks, a lot more focus on the models that Rick's talking about in terms of preemptive interventions. Now, in the past, if I'm brutally honest, we've tried to do some things in the past around mortgage rate rises and persistent debt and repeat use overdraft campaigns, things like that. But we haven't really had great engagement, if I'm honest, and I think our partners would back that up. But interestingly, we've worked a lot deeper with data on the latest exercises we've done, and the bank did a really good job of profiling what this new type of customer looks like. So they looked at how much they have left in their current account each month. I think they looked at something like sub £50 would mean you haven't got much resilience. They were looking at things like CII scores. So whether you haven't missed a payment yet, or you over indebted, and therefore if you did miss a payment, it's going to be more trouble for you. And lots of behavioral stuff that we then fed into a tailored journey. It was all digital as well, and we got the best engagement rates we've ever had because they'd invested up front and properly thinking about the population we want to engage and the service we want to engage in with and the channel. We got the best results we had. And I think obviously that will then help us improve the data population, to Rick's point, and learn more as we go. But I thought that was a really good tangible example. We only did that in April, and it was meant to be a one-off campaign. Now it's become business as usual because it worked so well. So we've definitely seen it further up the cycle.
Yeah, Nina, we had a conversation, before this year about social tariff, I suppose, and the fact that you can't pick your customers. I mean, have you got like preemptive stuff that you can do to sort of, and is that increasingly important in the utility and the water industry?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. We within the water industry is reasonably unique. We run a monopoly, so we can't choose our customers, and our customers can't choose their water provider. And so we provide water, to every household, and if payment is not made, we cannot and should not, and we don't want to, we don't turn that water off. So the goods continue to be consumed. So that indebtedness and persistent debt is probably a later question, but it is a real challenge to do the right thing for the customer. I mean, we absolutely, over the last 6 months, we have been far more proactive in preventing customers falling into debt in the first place. Quite simply, we are the water industry, from my perspective, coming from financial services and banking, is very much behind financial services and banking, and it comes to like use of data, credit strategy. But one of the things that we have done that had tangible, it had tangible benefit for both Thames and for our customers was around implementing SMS reminder strategies for those customers who were on pay on bill. So they're not already on a plan, and they have in the past, potentially, they've paid when that bill's arrived. So sending reminders around when that bill's going to be arriving, or after that bill's arriving, prior to that due date, to prompt repayment. And we have seen, we've seen through the testing that we've done, that that's had a measurable impact on those customers that were pay on bill from falling into collections. And we continue to see that at this time as well. So that's been very important. We've also started to amend strategies. So when customers do come into collections, if they come into collections and they have broken a plan, a payment plan, whether that's a payment plan that was all up to date, that's just how they've chosen to pay their water bill, or indeed it was a payment plan that was also repaying arrears that they may have. The different strategies, how we reach out to them quicker to ascertain what their circumstances are, has anything changed, so we can get quickly to them, because they have demonstrated, as Rick's talked about, that willingness to pay in the past. And so to try and set them up on, it may well be, and we are seeing that customers are coming off plans that pay for the water over the course of 12 months onto plans that are reduced, and that they pay for the bill over a longer period of time.
Yeah. So it sounds like, even though you've sort of got the restrictions around, I suppose, the water industry and the dynamics around that in terms of customers, and there are always customers and they still have ongoing supply, you're still using segmentation to then look at different types of strategies for different customers and those kind of things.
100%. We have the same challenges that any other organisation has around managing the costs of collections, and we have a duty to our customers and shareholders who pay for that to have strength in that. In those collection strategies, we have to ensure that we're treating our customers fairly and with respect, and understand their needs and circumstances. But absolutely, segmentation is a growing priority, and is, when I look at our initiatives this year, almost 50% of the initiatives we plan to deliver over the course of the year have some level of segmentation within them.
Yeah, and I suppose I want to come to, we talked a bit about, I suppose, behavioral modeling, and I suppose behavioral economics, I suppose, is something that actually came up in the previous section as well, which is around the, I think before we were very much like, well, this is what the behavior was before, and so therefore that's going to be predictive of the future. But like, what were the things we've sort of seen recently is that humans don't necessarily act rationally. I think it was described in the last session. I mean, how much of that is that the new frontier in terms of modeling, as much as sort of like credit bureau behavioral model, credit bureau sort of like financial modeling, and now we're getting into this almost like behavioral economics type modeling. I mean, Rick, I know you had an opinion on that. You're sort of nodding that.
Yeah, 100% is exactly where you are. Collections is very good at financial modeling. I've done it. We've been doing it for a long time. A lot of what we're talking about is financial modeling, right? And we try to put people in those buckets of where they are. There are human beings underneath this. Like I joked before, there's human beings underneath all this hard mathematics that's out there. And really, we built and continue to build customer profiles, and those customer profiles are not financial, they're behavioral. So how does the human react to the situation in which we find them? Because then that can govern what strategies you can employ against them. As an electronic or digital strategy, most collection companies now are moving towards digital strategies, and they're very effective. because they're not accusatory. When someone ceases paying a bill for whatever reason, they have difficulty doing so, or a lot of bills, it's almost a failure as an adult. And we call it, we used to call it a failure on the adult report card, right? So now they've gotten an F in an area where they've been societally, their parents, their grandparents, everyone pays their bills. They may not, right? People don't walk around the street with I'm not paying my bill on their shirt. But we believe other people are succeeding in an area where we're failing, and people can have a variety of reactions to that. If you can understand the reactions that the human beings have to this particular area they find themselves in, the strategies get much easier. Maybe they'll bluster and yell and curse at the agent every time they call. And that's for a reason. Or maybe they will give you all the reasons why they can't pay, and that's for a reason. And they want to do that. They need to do that. So how do you design strategies that it's okay to be angry about this? It's okay that you've gone through these things, not justifying, but validating that it's a human being that is struggling. When those strategies are employed as almost you got the verticals of willingness and ability, but you have these horizontals, you can begin to create almost heat maps. And those areas where customers fall, you could begin to say there's a strategy for each one of those. Maybe I give it to an agent who's more caring. Maybe I move this one to digital, because I know in the past they find themselves better off in those strategies. And then what Nina's doing is you say, well, are there any other populations outside of my collections world that perhaps begin to look like that? And maybe I should preempt a little there. Maybe I should have a outreach call or send a marketing piece to that group to say, hey, I'm sure everything's fine, but if it's not, here we are. Give us a call. We have ways to help. That is the most advanced way that people are beginning to attack these populations, not just hammering them with phone calls or sending letters and letters and letters.
And how far do you think you can sort of take that sort of like the analytics and the automation? I mean, do you and I'll go to maybe Nina and Peter tonight. I mean, do we always need to have a human involved to really understand affordability or forbearance, or is that just a comfort blanket for us?
Sorry.
I'll take. Yes, we do. The best way to have customer engagement and great customer engagement then can often lead to payment is to choose channels of their preference. And whilst channel preferencing to work digitally is absolutely growing, there are customers that prefer to have a conversation, a human-to-human conversation, and will always want to have a human-to-human conversation. And there are complexities also, particularly in the vulnerability, where actually it's a long way off where you can think that those complexities can be fully responded to by automation or otherwise. And so absolutely, I mean, long term, within Thames, our ambition is to be able to have a far better digital offering to our customers that choose to operate in that way and choose to transact with the organisation in that way. But we have a long-term relationship with our customers a lot, and we do see it in that way, and therefore investing in people and capability to be able to support those conversations that need to happen and customers want to happen, but with a person will absolutely. I cannot see that ever not being part of our DNA. But it will change over time.
I mean, Peter, what's your view in terms of?
Yeah,
can you never take the human out, or?
I think our view at the minute is no. I think we're quite unique in terms of being a debt advice provider with very heavy regulated activity, the severe consequences in that advice process. To be honest, the regulations more or less going through a mortgage advice process and a KFI at the end of it, etc. Because of the complexities, I don't think we could ever go full on robo advice, but we do very much see our culture as kind of digital first with a human touch. So digital has been the biggest unblocker of engagement, which is the single biggest problem in our sector. For exactly what Rick said earlier about the stigma of debt and I've failed, is still a very real thing now in 2022. It takes people still over a year to present themselves to us as, you know what, I give up now, I now need help because of that shame, that feeling of failure. Once about 4 years we set about our digital transformation, and it unlocked much better engagement in terms of new customers coming in. We rather than forcing people to go down a quite rigorous order-taking conversation of what do you spend on this, what do you spend on that, we digitized that process with our partner PayLink solutions to do a digital INE, which really helped. Some of the tech can really enable conversations. So it had helpful things like CRA pull in there. So rather than grabbing all these bits of paper and these bills, it could just consolidate the customer's position in one go. So now, I mean, we're full omni-channel now, but in terms of our resource split, about 30% of our resource will be on digital channels. So yes, it'll be a digital service, live people live chatting, but it'll be a human at the end of it, if that makes sense. So they can really complement each other, whereas I don't think we'd ever, shall we make that a chatbot? Because actually no, because we need that interaction by a human. So I think we'll get better at humans using digital to engage the other human at the end rather than full robotics.
Do you think, are we gathering enough data to using the technology? I mean, you mentioned around messaging there, and there's data within that. There's data within every single conversation we have with the customers. Well, I mean, we heard that on some of the last calls. You just mentioned it when you sit down and you listen to calls, you actually get data there. I mean, are we just at the start of getting that data? Are we using enough, or do you think there's more we could actually gather or garner? I mean, Peter, maybe
is that to me?
Yeah. Just expand on what you think.
Yeah. So you're right. The omni-channel at the minute, the hardest bit is getting it all to speak to each other and update on your CRM. So you've got a holistic view of interactions and what's happening going on. But we are getting there, and then can use technology such as Rick's to then really focus on that data and holistically, what did that live chat dictate? What did that phone dictate? What did that SMS dictate? But we do see different behavior via channels. So one of the newest things we do is working with partners on in-app journeys. And what's interesting, you can tell difference in engagement between somebody that would just start on a bank's website versus somebody that's in an authenticated tailored journey with their bank. So you definitely see a change in engagement, significant uplift, sort of 20-30%, if you invest in presenting a tailored digital journey to Chris rather than just a generic, I've blasted out an SMS campaign, I've just blasted out. If you can get authenticated journeys, which then unlocks the data that you know about Chris to then tailor that comms and that journey, you get much better success rates. And that's the kind of learning through our partners that we want to get to in PayPlan. We do have a PayPlan Plus app. It's not very well developed at the minute. It takes a lot of payments. To your point, Rick, we do have people that want to go on and pay, but we don't have much interaction on it. And I think we can really improve that side of our service. And
I'll come to you in a minute, Nina, but I mean, so just to get you to comment on that a little bit, Rick, in terms of we talk about gathering the extra data, but then there's also this symbiosis between gathering the data and then the process that then measures more data that you can then gather more data. I mean, is that a further evolution? I mean, are you seeing there's a lot more to? Are we just let's just get as much data as we possibly can at the moment?
Yeah, the complexity is, and Peter, I think is a perfect example. When you add a new channel to your omni-channel strategy, it's just a digital chat. That's going to drive a whole new set of data that enters into your organization. When you add a software like us and it takes all the interactions and tells you what's going on inside them, that's a whole new set of information you have to now deal with. Where the machines really become helpful is when you began to grab these new data structures and new data areas, and what is the correlation between them? Is it working? Is it not? What is growing? What isn't? What should we try? What should we not? And so in the collections world, I think, Chris, what we've seen is there's been a almost exponential explosion of data that companies can operate from, both from what they buy, credit bureaus, and however they purchase that data, to what they're generating internally and what they can get their hands on. But collection companies traditionally are not data companies. They are exactly what they sound like, collection companies, right? And so using that data, as Peter mentioned, how difficult is it to be one step away from the data that he uses, where his clients are actually generating an enormous amount of data, the issuers, the people who created the financial situation, that the debt, and that the customer finds themselves in. He's reacting to that on the inside. And so the amount of data that gets pulled in to give you the stats that Peter gave us, so that we look at, is huge. And so it's really more about using the data you have, which has always been the story. We used to call it big data, right? 10 years ago. It's using the data you have. Now the machines and the computational expense are dropping, which means you can compute data much more cheaply and much more rapidly than we used to. But when that happens, we get more data. So now what if I told you, we're looking at the acoustic measures of a phone call, not what they say, but how they sound when they say it. That's a whole new layer of data that gets pulled in that can be put into models. But once again, this is constantly exploding the amount of data. And so that's why Peter could meet a client right where they need to be met many times, because he has the right data to do so. we're going to add another data piece in. He's going to get a more discrete place to meet them and a more discrete place to meet them. And so if that makes sense, it's becoming difficult to even manage the data in this space. But when it's managed well, you can create solutions that are incredibly finite and also much more consumer friendly.
Yeah. And I suppose I was going to ask Nina a question. So we can get quite excited around the data and having lots of different segments and those kind of things. And people, I get excited about it. I love it. I love the math.
Me too.
But I suppose keeping our feet on the ground can also be a bit of a problem in terms of how do we keep our feet on the ground and how do we make sure it's relevant to customers? Okay, so we've got views around propensity to pay. It can help us around that. But how do we make sure it makes a difference on the ground to customers who, at the end of the day, there's a human, isn't there, at the end of the road on it? I mean, how do we think about this interaction between sort of technology and then the operational process?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I mean, Thames are in a slight. Thames aren't necessarily typical of the water, other water companies either. Our appreciation of data and our ability to retain data, capture data in the first thing is still not where my experience in banks. We're still way behind that, and so we're starting to really give key efforts into capturing data. And we have voice analytics. Part of the problem with voice analytics, or not the problem with voice analytics, but organizations, what we need to continue to remember is as you start to get more data, you need the organizational design around your business to then do something with that data. Otherwise, you're just sitting on a lot of data that you're not really using usefully. And I think going back to your question, though, you've got to remember, and I think as we start to become more analytical, as we start to provide customers with propositions that, are probably know what they're thinking before the actual human brain has decided what they're thinking, which is pretty scary, is the fact we cannot forget, we cannot not just go down the track of getting consumed by the data and forgetting, as you say, there's that customer at the end of it. So how do we make sure we do that? Or one of the ways, it's not all the ways, but I think one of the ways we need to make sure that you don't lose sight of the customer is just making sure that you have the right KPIs within your business that are really measuring those customer outcomes, customer satisfaction, that true customer engagement. So there's lots of things that organizations really need to think about in answering that question, but making sure certainly that your CSAT, your CMEX, your customer satisfaction, how you're capturing that data, where you're capturing it, and we think a lot about capturing customer satisfaction through telephone calls, but how are you capturing it through other channels that you're using to make sure that you're really understanding how your customers are responding to how you're interacting with them. So I think KPIs are making sure that you have the right KPIs. And I think the second thing that I'd say, and there's many more than this, is just also ensuring that, which is a bit of a bigger, but the culture of the organisation is really close to the customer and doesn't start to be totally absorbed by the numbers that are being churned out from the analytics team or from the finance team. And you just always remembering that there is a customer at the end of whatever service you're providing. And it is important that is very much as much about the culture as the organisation, the culture, the tone from the top, as anything else as well. So there's a lot more than that, but they would be the two that I would draw out.
So do you think that the whole sort of piece around AI analytics, the use of data, are we sort of growing up to a certain extent in terms of melding it with the operational process and the human piece and the process design as well? I mean, is that really where we are, almost like a bit like the change curve and where we are? I mean, we sort of is it sort of maturing really in terms of this complexity where I think we never understand about you mash things together?
Yes, I mean, I think, and depending on the industry and depending on the company you're within that industry, you're at a different point in time. We're quite immature in that, I was saying, but absolutely, we are maturing. I think the future of customer service in its biggest sense, including collections, including dealing with customers in vulnerable situations for the next 5 years, is super exciting. And actually, I think the propositions can only get better for customers as well as those firms involved. I do believe that. It's interesting around beyond that, where this tipping point of it is now not really help. It's gone beyond helping the customer, and there's other something else there. But I mean, from a Thames perspective, we're at the beginning of that journey, and I think for right now it is exciting, and you know, there's the maturity coming.
I mean, and I'm just you mentioned around like the next sort of like 5 years in terms of what that brings. I mean, I was going to just we're almost at the end of time. Ask Peter and Rick around that. I mean, Peter, what do you think the next 5 years, 2 to 5 years, is going to bring us?
Goodness me. I think better synergy between, I talked earlier about that synergy between human and digital, remove this idea that they clash and it's one or the other. It's got to be more synergized. The CRMs have got to catch up, in particular, you know, I'm not just talking from our point of view, I was in bar, but I think I go speak to a lot of partners who are like, well, that'd be great, but we're still building upon a system that's 30 years old, archaic, and people need to get over that and just make that investment. And just to be focused, I think a lot we touch on the so what. Rick brought that up, so what? What's the point in all this data if you're not going to use it? And I think the most success we've had this year is actually bringing our people with us on investing in our vulnerability technology. So we've had a vulnerability panel which we built in-house, which we've used over years to record consent and the types of vulnerability, but we've now overlaid to that what we call our wider support panel. So they can now talk to each other and recognize that if you've ticked mental health or whatever that issue may be, it will then look to our wider support panel, which has 65 plus support agencies that we work with, and it's clever enough to say, right, you now need to send Mr. Smith over here to, you know, rethink or mind or whatever that may be, and track those data points. So then you as an organization can get a real good view of, right, here's the needs of my customers and here's how I've met those needs. But then it also informs your future strategy, to your point, in terms of, well, okay, now I need a relationship with this organization, to Rick's point, feedback into what are my comms I need to look like going forward for this type of customer. And it is just, I agree, a lot of the time it is so what, because if you can't use the data, it's pretty much pointless gathering it.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I mean, Rick, maybe some final thoughts on how you sort of see the future kind of laying out.
Yeah,
I mean, you've been at the forefront of it for a while, but I suppose it would be good to see what you think is going to come next.
Yeah, the terrifying machines take over the world portion of the presentation. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing in machine learning is machines are beginning to understand, or we're beginning to train machines to understand our world the way we understand our world, which is a really big advance. The easiest one for us to think about is self-driving cars, right? For a self-driving car to work, it's image technology. It's all it's doing is it's taking an enormous amount of images, but it's interpreting those images and it's able to turn them into what we call driving a vehicle, right? And so it can begin to interpret our world. Some of the newer algorithms that are out there, machines are becoming very intelligent at presenting their findings, the results or predictions back to us in a way that we actually understand them. This will drive a whole new set of solutions for every industry. So one of the issues that we have right now is, you know, AI, kind of what is that? What do you do with it? But the more the machines can come back and say, this is what you should do with this. This is where your world is. For my interpretation of it, the easier it is to take action. The prevalence of data scientists, the me's of the world that are out there is getting greater and greater. And so now CEOs can say, well, I want that. I don't know what that is, but I want that. And those resources are achievable. In the 50s, you couldn't get a data scientist. It didn't hardly exist, right? And today they're a full marketplace of them that you can select from that have a variety of skills. And so what's coming down the road is we're going to find the algorithms to become more human friendly in a way that companies can take action on them. And it won't just be for the early adopters, it'll be for everyone. And that will make our world substantially better because we're finally using data that humans would have used in their brain if we had the right humans in that space, but now machines can begin to push those in. So that's my prediction of machines taking over the world. They're going to do it kindly and nicely, and we're going to like it.
I like that. Well, Nina, Rick, and Peter, thanks very much for making the time with us today. So I appreciate that, and you know, it's great to have some really interesting insights. Fascinating. So, Colin, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks, Chris. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. That was really good, really interesting as ever. Yeah, I don't know about robots taking over the world, but we need a government in this country first. But yeah, no, really good. Thank you. So that was our third session of the day. We've got one more planned. The marathon is nearly over, so to speak. So our next session, which will begin at 1 o'clock, we'll look at the future of collections technology. And if you want to join that within this platform, you can see a link in there for you to sign up if you haven't already. Really good. We've had lots of interesting questions as well. As I mentioned before, we'll write a little review of this event next week with some of those questions that we've missed off and some of the polls that we've collated as well. So, but I want to round off by thanking Rick from the event supporter Coal Miner for his input. Obviously, Nina and Peter as well, and of course Chris Warburton for his brilliant presentation in chairing the event. So as I say, we're going to join the next event at 1 p.m, but for now I'd like to say thank you to everybody for tuning in and goodbye. Thank you.